Pro Football Playbook, presented by the Pigskin Podcast Network. Your source for team news, draft needs, player profiles and rankings, full Senior Bowl, Combine, and NFL draft coverage, news, analysis, discussion. It's in the playbook. Now, here is your host, sports journalist Bill Alvstad, and featured analyst Keith Myers. Hey, Pro Football Playbook Podcast listeners. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with Keith Myers. Keith, welcome into the show.
Yeah, it's a fun show this week. We got our last of the series of divisions, or our eighth division. We'll be doing the AFC East this week. And
getting it out just in the nick and time.
We are, at the time of recording, I'm looking at my watch here. We are 24 hours and 25 minutes away from the draft. So,
yeah. Which means I should probably go ahead and just get this out too, right after we get it done. Yep. So that I'm just done with it. Draft is coming up tomorrow, Thursday, the first round. And we've just kind of had this series of shows related to team needs so that we could kind of establish what some of these teams are looking for in the draft. Always a fun process. It's a great show. We've always started at the bottom and worked our way up to the top of these divisions as kind of we see it, or how they finished last year. Seemingly most of the future predictions seem to line up with the way the divisions finished, with a couple of exceptions. This division is really no different. At the bottom is the New York Jets. And it's hard. The Jets do have a real good opportunity to improve here, and they've got
top 10 picks.
Yeah, with a new coach as of last year, Robert Saleh, who's excellent, and it's a draft that's really set up for them to do well. They've got the number 4 overall pick, number 10 that they picked up from Seattle in the Jamal Adams trade a year ago. 35, 38, 69, 111, 117. They've got a lot of ammunition there to move around.
Yeah, they do.
Also pick some great players in those spots. So as you see it, Keith, what do they need? Other than the generic answer would be everything.
Well, the thing is, they don't actually need everything. This roster isn't great, but it's got some pieces. They believe they've got their quarterback in Zach Wilson, although he didn't do much last year. It's still the Jets, and it's still kind of a weak roster. The biggest problem that I have with what they've done so far is they didn't use the free agency period to take a step forward. I mean, they gained Laken Tomlinson, but they lost Morgan Moses on the on the offensive line. They gained Braxton Berrios, but they lost Jamison Crowder. It's just a lot of trading players in and out that aren't necessarily big improvements. Mm-hmm. They really need to add talent. They are in position to do so. They need an offensive tackle, but guess what? They have the 4th pick, and Ekwonu is probably going to be sitting there for them to take a absolutely beast of an offensive tackle.
I think that would be ideal. Right now, they've got Fant sitting over there on the right side. I think they'd like an upgrade there. He's not horrible, but he's not great. On the other side, Becton's sitting there. So they've got that kind of figured out. I agree that at the top of the draft, they could use an edge, but I think that the higher priority there is to help their quarterback. And when you're sitting there at that premier position, at that premier spot, at the premier position in football, that's the hardest to fill. I think they should go ahead and take care of that. And I think that they will. I think that's one of the most easily predicted choices in the draft, considering also they've got number 10.
Mm-hmm. Well, and at 10, because you look at the way the draft is setting up, you might see a guy like Kayvon Thibodeau from Oregon, the edge, dropping low enough that he comes into play for them. Or if he doesn't, then someone will move up for him, and it causes a better player to drop down to them, whether it be a cornerback or one of those guys. And if they really don't like the way everything falls after they get Ekwonu, you're still looking at getting the best wide receiver in the draft if you want them, or a fantastic defensive tackle and a guy like Jordan Davis, or they're going to be able to add on both sides of the ball. And then they're going to be able to also add with 2 picks in the 30s. So they're looking at getting 4 starters out of this draft. Ultimately, I mean, they're in position to really get younger and more talented.
Yeah, the question is, how fast can they coagulate around all of that in their first year together? And I see them greatly improving. I mean, I don't know that they're going to be second in the division this year, but this team could get to 8 wins. And I don't think that that's completely out of the possibility. Nope. And next year, I mean, when you combine next year's draft to this year's crop, I think they'll be in a position to really kind of to go forward and be relevant again in that division. And it's been a while.
Agreed. One thing that I was just thinking about this, they could use defensive back help, and they did lose a safety. If they don't go edge at at 10, a guy like Kyle Hamilton, if he drops, would be a fantastic addition. And so
that's when his value starts really making sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he's a top 5 talent in this draft. There's just no question. It's just his positional value is tough for some teams, especially when somebody like a defensive edge or a tackle is dropping. He might get bumped up if somebody comes up and reaches for a quarterback in this draft, or takes a wide receiver earlier than we think. That could push a guy like Hamilton down, and that would be a terrific pickup for them. Absolutely, I agree.
So at free safety, Kyle Hamilton would be awesome, and then I still think Ekwonu is the pick at 4, and that just these are the kind of blue chip players that we're talking about. The best player at their position at 2 different positions in this draft, at right tackle and free safety. And so you're talking about, that's just a major upgrade on this team that needs upgrades. And they'll be able to do similar things with 2 picks in the 30s. I do think they're getting
and 69. And 69. They could come out with a starter conceivably there if it's like a running back, or you could even have a corner there that's a slot kind of corner, top 2 or 3 in the draft as well.
Or linebacker. An interior offensive lineman.
Yep.
They've got a great they could get 5 starters. They could get 5 starters out of this, like day 1 starters out of this draft, and then fill out some depth with the rest of their picks. They have a chance,
and they've got room for those draft picks to play. So it's not when you say starter, you're not kidding. I mean, it's like they would get significant rotation or starter minutes. All right, Miami. Where do you see Miami?
So Miami is kind of interesting to me because some people are like, hey, you know what? They still need a quarterback. And other people are like, no, Tua's the guy. And they just gave him a new fancy weapon that's going to make him look really good in Tyreek Hill. And this is a team that's ready to take the next step. And I don't know if that's true or not, but
I'm certainly in the camp of give Tua 1 more year. I don't think it's you go in. In fact, they don't have the draft capital to really look at
not anymore.
Addressing the quarterback position. Right. But I'm definitely, prior to this, I was pro Tua. I mean, I really do believe that he is he's got a new coach this year. He's going to have a new system. He's going to be able to have the new weapon and hopefully something else that's surrounding him. Where do you see them then having needs in this draft, or still unfulfilled as we head into training camp?
Well, I'd like to see them pick up another wide receiver. Yes, they added Tyreek Hill, but they did lose Will Fuller, and it would just be nice to add another weapon. I think they need a cornerback after watching a guy like Jason McCourty leave. And so get, there's some tweaking that can still happen to to this roster, but it's a better roster than people think.
So the one area that I thought that they could probably use a guy as right tackle or center, they've got that right tackle, Robert Hunt, draft pick from a couple of years ago that really just hasn't done a lot there. And then at center, they've got Michael Dieter. And then after that, they really just don't have anything. And so I was thinking right tackle or center, they could potentially in the third round there at 102, maybe even they package a pick or a future pick to move up and get at least one offensive lineman starter out of this draft. I think that's where their real need is. But I get the idea of needing another weapon or going in a different direction on defense or whatever. But that's kind of where I'm seeing them have that real need.
Their first overall pick isn't till 102. They have 0 picks in the top 100. Saying, they need to go draft a right tackle.
I know
you're not getting a starter at right tackle.
I know. That's why I was thinking maybe center. Center might be a better option, especially if they could move up a little bit, like into around 80 or 79 or something like that.
Yeah, but with you've only got 4 picks. I don't see them.
They'd have to leverage the future a little bit.
Yeah, and so they did go get Terran Armstead at offensive tackle, to play left tackle. And I think that overall, they may be looking at okay, we know we needed to upgrade the offensive line, but we upgraded the most important position on the offensive line, and that might be all we get this year, and then we'll worry about more of it next year. That may be the game. I still think you're picking at 102. What they need a cornerback. This is a good draft to need a cornerback. They need a wide receiver. It's a good draft to need a wide receiver. It wouldn't hurt for them to get a defensive tackle or defensive end up front. That's going to be harder. That's going to be hard to do when you don't have any draft picks in the top 100. And so that's where I kind of see them going is the corner and wide receiver route, at least with those first couple picks of theirs.
They might go running back too. I mean, they finished 30th.
That's true.
In rushing as a team last year. Anyway, how about the New England Patriots? This is a fascinating team, kind of on the rise in a tough division, in a tough AFC conference overall. So how do you see the New England Patriots? I know that they've got the first in the first round 21st overall pick, second round 54. And then they just have, a few picks there. I think that, maybe from my perspective, possibly wide receiver. How do you see it, Keith?
Always wide receiver in New England. They can't seem to figure that position out. Belichick is a fantastic drafter of talent as long as it's not the wide receiver position.
Only Bourne, Parker, and Ty Montgomery are signed after this season too. So I mean, they could restock that.
Yep. Although, they have done some nice things. Getting Devontae Parker, who had a big year, but then is kind of not. He's been injured and hasn't kind of lived up to his draft hype, and then kind of got replaced this last year as the number 1. He has that talent, and he has a talent that no other receiver on this roster has had for quite a while. So I like what they did there, but they lost Shaq Mason, who was an important part of their interior line. There are still some weaknesses in this roster. We saw them last year make the playoffs by beating up on a lot of really bad teams, but when they played good teams,
that's exactly right. They weren't quite ready, and they had a rookie quarterback. They had a great, fantastic year for a rookie, but also held them back a little bit in winning tight games.
Well, true, but he was also the best of the 5 rookies.
That's true, and it was quite a class.
So it was quite a class, and I still think that all 5 of them have potential to be very good. I mean, there's a lot of talent, and they all got drafted into some tough situations, and the team still needs to build around them a little bit.
Mac Jones threw for 3,800 yards last year. 22 touchdowns. He probably had a few more interceptions than he needed to. Damian Harris at running back had a great year. Jacoby Myers, at the wide receiver position had a good year, but still middling as far as a passing team. I think that the wide receiver thing is really a big thing with Bill Belichick there. And but their defense, I thought was really good. I don't see a heck of a lot of need there. You mentioned offensive line. I think that's the other area.
Well, they did. They lost J.C. Jackson, replaced him with Malcolm Butler. I actually think that's kind of a downgrade.
They're not the same players.
And so, but overall, it's the same position. And so I just think that that you can get a corner in this draft, a good starting caliber corner in this draft, late in round one, where they're going to be a guy like Elam would be good. What?
Yeah, I have a question for you. Why do you think a team like New England allowed their top, one of the top corners in the draft, first round pick, top 10 pick, and not want to pay that guy, knowing that probably for a couple of years you knew you were going to have to pay him, and then you just let him go?
I don't know, because it's not like his performance has been bad. His performance has been good.
Absolutely, one of the best corners in football.
Yeah, and so I don't know that answer. I think maybe it was just it's a priority issue, and they're like, yes, he is a good player, but to re-sign him at the cost it would take to re-sign him is not a higher priority for us than it was to go get a guy like Devontae Parker and build around their quarterback and help their quarterback out. I don't know if I agree with that, but I'm not going to question Bill Belichick's ability to build a roster.
The only reason I really question it, I wouldn't just question CJ Jackson in isolation, but the year before they lost Stephon Gilmore. And so for me, you mentioned cornerback as being a need. I do think that they need to upgrade that. I think the idea you mentioned in the draft before I interrupted you, sorry, that would be kind of a position that they would be looking at. And I kind of agree with that. I think linebacker, Dante Hightower and Van Noy are not there. And so they could get younger and faster at linebacker. I don't know. I just think that that's kind of weird that J.C. Jackson was not brought back.
I found that to be odd as well. And I don't know the story behind there, if there was some reason why, because he was a guy who performed, and for them to just let him walk. And
Gilmore
surprising.
Again, it's just like,
I mean, Gilmore had been great in the past, but you could see that he was starting to trend downward, and so it wasn't as surprising that they let him go. Jackson's young; he's entering his prime. He's
just going to turn 27 this year.
Yeah, and so that was more of a surprise. Bringing back a guy like Malcolm Butler, who is just not the same quality of player, but he's a more familiar name, I think, perhaps for most non-New England fans, but he isn't as good by any stretch of the imagination. So they need a corner. They're in position with where they're drafting to go get a guy like Elam out of Florida, or
McDuffie or not. Yeah,
actually,
what was the other guy's name? Gosh, I'm having a hard time now. Not Gardner, but hold on.
Elam, McCrary, Gordon, Booth Jr.
That's Gordon, is who I was trying to think of.
That's the group. Somewhere between Elam and Booth Jr.
And McDuffie, Trent McDuffie. I mean, but Trent McDuffie, I think, may go earlier than the Patriots pick. But if he's hanging around, that would be a good pick.
Yeah, I was thinking he was going to go earlier, but if he's available, he's that's a good player, and for them to be able to get a guy like that.
Sometimes I'm starting to rattle off names, and I hit McDuffie. It was the right name, and I'm now questioning myself as to how many names I actually have in my brain, and was that really a cornerback, or is that a player from last year?
It's like, that time of year, isn't it?
We're almost done. Literally, the brain is maxed out now, and it's time to relax and enjoy the event as it unfolds finally. All right.
I like to call this draft fatigue, where we've just talked about so many players for so long. At some point, we just our brains just like, enough, no more.
Oh, purge. Right. You've been wanting to talk about the Buffalo Bills for a while. You mentioned, in fact, this division a couple of shows ago as something that you were kind of looking forward to talking to, and then Buffalo Bills. I'm very curious as to how you see this team, where they're positioned currently, how they kind of went through the offseason, and do you think they're ready for a legit run to challenge any other AFC team to get to the Super Bowl?
They were 13 seconds away, I believe, from being the Super Bowl team. Now, I know they would have still had to go in and beat Cincinnati, but I honestly think that they were better equipped to beat the Bengals than the Chiefs were. And then they add Von Miller to help their pass rush. They add Roger Stafford to give them a little bit of an upgrade on the offensive line, and O.J. Howard to give them an upgrade at tight end. The only thing that I look at when I see this is they lost Emmanuel Sanders and Cole Beasley, neither of which are the player that they once were. At least in my opinion, Sanders is an older guy. Beasley's still a guy I love to hate because every time he plays my team, he seems to always get 15 catches and all of them are for first downs. Maybe that's not true, but it sure feels like it. But he's been a good player, but he's also getting older now. Both those guys are gone. They need a wide receiver. They still do. They could probably use 2. And they could use some depth on the offensive line. But overall, this roster is built. It is stacked. It is ready to win now. And the fact that they've got, arguably the most talented quarterback in the NFL under center certainly doesn't hurt things.
Yeah, I mean, they finished first in the NFL in points against. We talk about their offense all the time, but nobody's really talking about their defense. They allowed 17 points a game. They scored 28.4 points a game, third in the NFL. The point differential was one of the best in the league. And they finished 6th rushing. They finished 9th passing. They could probably finish 1st passing if they wanted to. They're just a very talented group on offense. It's their defense, I think, that really makes this team dangerous. And they fell asleep, I thought, a little bit last year in the middle of the season. They had to make up some ground at the end, which they did. But nonetheless, they just couldn't quite get it done there to get into the Super Bowl. And they ran into a great young quarterback is kind of what happened to them.
For them, like, you take that defense that you were just touting and you add Von Miller as a pass rush specialist coming off the edge. And that's a scary proposition. And the fact that they are now, situated with where they're sitting to go. I mean, this is a really deep wide receiver draft, and they don't need their top 2 spots. They need a number 3 and a number 4, in that range. They're going to be able to go get that. I mean, they may not pick till 25 overall, but you're probably going to have most of the top receivers still available.
So you think they need a receiver? I think they need corner. I think those are the 2 positions that they need. They need somebody opposite to Tre'Davious White, I think, to be kind of a lockdown guy. And then they've moved on from Cole Beasley. They've moved on from Emmanuel Sanders. They got Jamison Crowder, but they could use a little bit more there. And I agree with you. I think 25 and 57, those picks, the second round pick is 57 overall. You can get a corner, you can get a wide receiver. So it really doesn't matter which way they go. I think they need to allow the board to kind of come to them a little bit. There's also sitting there at 25 in a prime position for a team to move back up into the first round. And so they could get additional draft capital in the top 100 picks to kind of help them address a couple of things. They don't need a whole bunch. They've got a whole bunch of picks, 4, 5, 6, couple of 6, the 7th round. They could use some of those picks as ammunition as well to move around a little bit and help them.
Yeah, this is a roster that doesn't need much. They are ready to compete. They're ready to win a championship right now. They're loaded. Wide receiver, corner, I agree with you that those are kind of where I would like to see them add with their first couple picks. And with that 3rd pick, what is it, number 89 overall? I went number 89. A guy like Abraham Lucas, the offensive tackle out of Washington State, a guy with all the talent and all the pass rushing or the pass blocking reps you could ever want from an offensive tackle, just to give them some depth. He's a guy that could be your swing tackle this first year, maybe develop into a starter or in a year or 2. Just that kind of depth on the offensive line, so that way your season isn't derailed by a key injury. Because when you're ready to go win a title, the last thing that you want is for your left tackle to get hurt and then not have a good enough backup and have it hamstring your team when the rest of your roster is ready. You know what I mean? Like it requires a certain amount of luck to win a Super Bowl because you can't have your star players get hurt in certain key positions, but it helps if you have depth. And I do think that their offensive line could use some addition. So with that 89th pick, like that's the type of pick that I would like to see them do.
I think that's a great idea. And a guy like that, super athletic, has the athletic attributes, even though he started 30 some odd games at right tackle for Washington State. He has the athletic attributes to be able to play on the left side.
If you've watched
needs a little bit of seasoning.
Yeah, if you watch his tape, his feet are so good. His ability to not get beat by a speed rush will be very good. And they played him at right tackle because he was comfortable there, and they had he started out on the right side because they had another guy who got drafted last year on the left, and they just left him there because he was so good. And it's not like in the offense that they ran, which was the air raid, then it went run and shoot. Now it's apparently going back to the air raid, but whatever. The offense that they run, you're throwing the ball on almost every down. Other teams bring in their pass rushers in, and they're coming after your quarterback constantly from both sides. It's not a left side is the better player. You need pass blockers on both sides to make that thing work, and he proved that he could do that. So he has the attributes to be a left tackle, and so.
That's why I'm having a hard time thinking he might be around until 89. I mean, he showed up to that combine and blew everyone away. Like if you watched all the offensive linemen perform and you really kind of keyed in on him, he just looked better than everybody else. And so I'm kind of excited to see how he turns out as a pro. If he does end up on the left side, that would be, I think, fantastic for him and fantastic for a team if it works out. So.
No, and I agree with you. For me, it comes down to, I think there is some skepticism because of the system that he played in, and that kind of thing. But and I've seen him in draft boards around 90, and in mock drafts they're about 90, 92. And so if he is available in that range, like
there's I do believe that there are certain. And we're just going into the weeds here, but I do believe there are certain general managers who value those attributes more than others, and I think that somebody will go up and get him in the third, prior to, I'm going to say pick 75. That's I think where he's going to go, but I don't know for sure. I'm just making stuff up now.
Well, and 75 is actually a good number. I just checked the consensus big board from our partner site, the NFL mock draft database, and he is listed as a 75th overall prospect. According to the and that's up. He was down around the 9. He peaked at about 21, I think is what it was.
That's a little early for him.
But at some point he was that high. It was earlier in the year. Then he dropped down into the 90s. Now he's back up at 75. So it's he's been an interesting case to kind of watch this year.
All right. I think that's it. I think we've wrapped. This is literally a wrap on our pre-draft coverage.
Wow.
And we will get back here again, either post-draft or during the draft or after a first round or the first 3 rounds. We'll kind of give an update. And then next week, we'll start wrapping up what teams have done and remaining holes, all that kind of stuff. Fun conversations. It's always good once you finally get the draft out of the way. You know exactly what teams have done now, and you can start talking about real things. And we can get out of this pretend land that we've been in now for 4 months. So, all right, that's it. Let's wrap it up.
Let's do it.
Find Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. I'm at Alvstad NFL. You can find the show at PF_Playbook. Find us on your favorite podcast platforms and YouTube, and please subscribe. So take care, guys.
Thanks for listening to the Pro Football Playbook Podcast. Follow Keith at Myers NFL. Bill is at Alvstad NFL. The show is at PF_Playbook. Listen and subscribe on your favorite podcast app or YouTube and at our website, profootballplaybook.co.